I'm Chef Frank, this is Protocooks, and today we're making a mushroom strata. Chef Frank, what is a strata? Great question. A strata is basically an Italian savory bread pudding. For my mushroom strata, this is what you're gonna need. A baguette, pancetta, garlic, heavy cream, butter, mushrooms, onions, eggs, sherry, and champignon mushroom cheese. Before we get going with this, I want to talk about a couple of ingredients. First of all is the mushrooms. I'm using cremini mushrooms, basically a close cousin of the white button mushroom. They're sometimes marketed as baby Bella, and to me they taste pretty much the same as white button mushrooms. I like the color, I like the texture of these, but you can pretty much use whatever mushrooms you have in house. Another ingredient I want to talk about is sherry. Now, if you haven't had sherry, go out and get some and taste it. This one is dry. I've actually been to this producer in Spain, so that's why I chose it. And it's one of those things that really accentuates the flavor of mushrooms. It makes them more mushroomy. It's also really good to drink. Get out there, try some. Don't use a sweet cherry though. Sweet cherries for this might throw everything off, the balance of everything. It's a savory dish, it's not a sweet dish, so find a nice dry sherry. The last ingredient I want to talk about is a cheese from our sponsor, Quesari Champignon. This is Champignon Mushroom, and it's a bloomy white rind cheese, it's triple cream, and it's just one of those cheeses that adds so much depth and dimension to this dish. I think a strata needs cheese, and I think this one matches perfectly with our mushroom strata today. Usually with cheese, you don't see the mushroom component in there. This is a little different than your normal bloomy rind white cheese. Because it's studded with mushrooms, it has that beautiful earthy taste. It's super silky, it's super buttery, and rich and delicious. Champignon with mushrooms is made with milk from happy Bavarian cows. Bavaria's in Germany. It's a place you should visit. It pairs well with dried fruits, nuts, sherry, and pretty much any charcuterie you're gonna put on a board. This is a super unique cheese that can add an extra layer of that mushroom flavor to any of your dishes. So if you've never had it before, if you haven't seen it, I'm gonna put a link down here where you can find it. Go out and get some today. You will not be disappointed. First thing I wanna do is get our bread ready. I have a baguette. You could cut this, but I just like to tear it into pieces. And this is a great way to use up leftover bread. Actually, the strata itself is a great way to use up extra ingredients if you have things left over. It really lends itself to kind of make it whatever you want it. But the bread has to be a little stale. And if you don't have stale bread, you can always just toast it in the oven a little. And the reason for that is that the drier the bread, the more liquid it's gonna soak up and kind of the more custardy it's gonna be. So maybe just do this the night before you plan on making it, but just break your bread up. The baguette has lots of airy holes in it. That lends to the texture. If you want something a little denser, you can use more of like a white bread or a rustic white bread. And then just let it sit overnight and go stale. So my bread has sat overnight, it's stale. We're gonna put this aside as we assemble the rest of the dish. Next thing I'm gonna do is cook our mushrooms, and that's kind of the main flavoring base. So I'm gonna add some butter to the pan. I'm gonna use some pancetta. You don't have to put meat in this. It's not a requirement, but I like it because it's a little more hearty. Now, where would you see a strata? Strata is basically something I would serve as a brunch dish or a breakfast dish, right? What's cool about it is that you can actually mix all the ingredients together and put it in your dish uncooked overnight, so it soaks overnight, and just pop it in the oven in the morning. It also really reheats well. It's one of those things that you can cut a slice and brown it in the pan, put a fried egg on top, even though there's lots of eggs in it already. So the first thing I'm gonna do is put my butter in the pan, and I'm gonna add my pancetta. Now, I'm not really worried about the pancetta getting too brown, because this whole dish is gonna brown in the oven. I just wanna render out some of that fat, right? So I have it on fairly high heat right now. We're just gonna let this all kind of cook together and flavor our butter. You don't have to use butter, you can use olive oil if you want. I like the butter just for a little extra richness. So the pancetta is happily sizzling away. I'm gonna add my onions. Whenever I add onions, I always add a little bit of salt, draw out some moisture. I'm just gonna cook the onions until they're translucent and not raw. I don't really want a lot of color on these either. I'm gonna put a little pepper in now too. The onions are starting to get soft. I add my garlic. And the main reason I'll add my garlic with the onions is that it cooks a little quicker, so you don't want it to burn. I mean, it just smells so good already. For the most part, I'm giving it 2 or 3 minutes between each ingredient, just so that each ingredient has time to cook. Onions are super fragrant, garlic super fragrant. I'm gonna add my mushrooms now. Now the key here with the mushrooms is to add them, and I don't really care if they get all that brown, but I do wanna cook out almost all of the moisture. I want the moisture in this to kind of come from the cream and the eggs. So I'm gonna put these in here and let them cook down. Probably what's gonna happen is that the moisture is gonna come out, it's gonna bubble away and boil a little, which is okay. I'm gonna let it boil down before I add the sherry. At this point, you also wanna add a little more salt. Season as you go so you don't have to salt at the end. This is the main reason people's food is salty, is because they wait till the end and everything tastes salty because they didn't season throughout the cooking process. Salt, pepper. Salt will also dry out some moisture from the mushrooms. We're gonna let these cook until they cook down. These mushrooms will probably take about 7 or 8 minutes to cook. You can see here that the mushrooms are giving off a lot of liquid, and I want this to cook out. I want this to go fairly dry before I add the sherry. Okay, it's time for the sherry. You can actually hear that it's kind of starting to sizzle. Can you hear that? That means most of the moisture is cooked out. We're gonna add the sherry. And if you don't want to add alcohol to this, that's fine. But for the most part, when we add the sherry, all the alcohol is gonna cook off. We don't want that alcohol flavor, we want the sherry flavor. So I'm gonna add the sherry. If you have an open flame, be careful, this could go up. But I'm just gonna add enough sherry just to kind of moisten the pan and let it cook. And what I'm looking for here is that I don't smell alcohol, right? So I'm gonna try and cook all the booze off. I can smell sherry and alcohol now, but for the most part, I'm just gonna cook it off for maybe a minute or two to get that alcohol flavor out. Sometimes that adds a little bitterness to the dish or astringency to the dish that you don't want. So we'll just cook the alcohol out, keep the sherry flavor in there. All right, this is good to go. When I waft it, there's no more alcohol smell, shut it off, and I'm just gonna put it aside. I'm not gonna get it totally cold. If this is still warm when it goes into the cream mixture, it's not a big deal. You don't want it steaming hot though. So I'm just gonna set it aside, let it sit for about 15 minutes while we assemble our cream and bread mixture. Let's get the custard mixture ready. And it's pretty easy. I'm just gonna take my eggs, crack them into a large bowl. I have a giant bowl here. It's easier if you have a big bowl. Now, a lot of recipes have different amounts of eggs. I am going about with 8 eggs here. I want this to kind of be nice and firm, so we'll just put a few more eggs in. I'm gonna add some heavy cream. I'm gonna need a little more, that's not quite enough. And then I'm gonna add my champignon mushroom cheese. I'm just gonna break it up. I'm gonna save a little for the top of the strata, but I wanna put some of this in here now so it melts into the dish, right? So I'll save a little piece just to kind of put on top as like, you know, a little garnish, but for the most part, I just wanna break this up. Most people don't realize that with cheeses like this, bloomy white rind cheeses, you can eat the rind, it's delicious. It's a beautiful part of the cheese. Don't throw it away, just eat it, please. Stop being a baby. And like I said, I'll put a little chunk aside for the top of the actual strata. Let's hit this with some salt and pepper. Again, we always want to season. All right, and then whisk it together really good. You can use the whisk to break up some of that cheese. We want this to melt into the strata, so you don't have to be too delicate with it. And now it's time to assemble everything to put it into the oven. It's time to go. I'm gonna add all the bread. Get that in there. I'm gonna give this a quick stir to like start soaking that bread and getting all that custard mixed in. Usually the longer this soaks, the better. So we'll let it soak a few minutes before it actually goes into the oven. Then we're gonna add our mushroom mixture. It's still a little warm, not a big deal. Right, this is all gonna go in the oven anyway and get warm. Mix it really good. So what I'm gonna do now is take this whole mixture, put it into my roasting pan. Now I'm gonna spread it out so it's nice and even, right? So the custard has time to soak into the bread. I'm gonna let this sit for about 10 minutes so that the bread soaks up that custard, and then we can pop it in the oven. This has been sitting for about 10 minutes. The next thing I'm gonna do is take some of this beautiful champignon mushroom and pop it on top. Just dab it around. Don't be shy. We love the creaminess. All right, and then we're gonna put in the oven. I'm gonna put it in for about 45 minutes at 350. What I like to do here is take this whole tray and put it on a cookie sheet so that in case anything bubbles over, it bubbles over onto the tray and not into my oven. So I'm gonna go through this in the oven and I'll show you when it comes out. All right, so it's been about 30 to 40 minutes, and look at it, it's really just beautiful. And the way that I check it is when I squeeze it, it doesn't really feel wet. There's a little liquid coming out, but what I want this to do is set up. So I'm not gonna cut into it right away. I'm gonna give it a minute or two before we actually cut into it and let it settle, and then we can taste it. I'm gonna serve up a nice chunk of this for myself. Oh my goodness. It looks so good and cheesy and melty. Oh my gosh. All right, now's my favorite time to taste. I got my Star Wars tasting spoon, and you can just like look at it and appreciate this beauty of that gooey champignon mushroom cheese. It's like making it super gooey and delicious. I'm gonna get in there, get myself a piece of mushroom as well. Come on, get on the spoon. With the combination of the cheese, the eggs, the cream, and the sherry, and especially the mushrooms, oh man, I just can't see anyone not being happy eating this. I know that we have the pancetta in there, and that makes it meaty, but the mushrooms itself make it really meaty as well. If you've never had a Strata, you gotta make one. It is great for brunches, parties. You can serve this on a buffet. It is absolutely delicious, and it's really worth the time to try and make. I hope you liked this video. If you did, give us a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. There is merch in the description down below. There is also an opportunity to join us on Patreon and support us that way. I want to thank Caseri Champignon and Champignon Mushroom Cheese for sponsoring this video. I love your cheeses. I'm going to put a link in the description down below of where you can find their cheeses in your supermarket around you. And that's it. That's my mushroom strata. I hope you enjoy. I'm Chef Frank. This is Protocooks. Have a good one.